This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
The Sacrament of the Haunting. When Mark and Emily Henderson stumbled upon the Italian government's scheme to sell abandoned homes for €1, they couldn't resist the allure of the quaint village of San Bartolomeo, nestled in the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany. The photographs revealed an old stone house with ivy creeping up its walls and wooden shutters that promised privacy and charm. It seemed like a dream, a new beginning for the couple who had spent years hustling in the chaos of New York City. Upon arrival, they found the village of San Bartolomeo to be as picturesque as promised. Narrow cobblestone streets meandered between rows of old-world cottages, and the air carried the scent of olives and fresh-baked bread. Their house, however, was in dire need of renovation. Its exterior was worn, its windows covered with dust and grime. Yet something about it captivated Emily from the moment she saw it. "The last owner was the church," explained Matteo, the local agent who handed them the keys. "They sold it when the congregation dwindled, and it has been empty ever since." Inside, the house revealed itself in layers. The walls bore remnants of once vibrant frescoes, their colors dulled by time. A large, imposing fireplace dominated the living room, its stone mantel carved with intricate religious symbols. Emily felt a peculiar chill as she examined the carved angels and saints. A narrow spiral staircase led to the upper floors, which housed a series of cramped bedrooms and an attic filled with forgotten relics. As they unpacked, Emily found an old diary tucked between the pages of a decaying Bible. Its entries were written in Italian, the elegant script unfurling tales of mundane village life interwoven with a palpable undercurrent of fear. She resolved to translate it with her limited Italian, determined to uncover its secrets. In the days that followed, the couple worked tirelessly to restore their new home. Yet, strange occurrences plagued them. The lights flickered unexpectedly, and the air carried a damp, earthy smell. The plumbing groaned as if the pipes were struggling against some unseen force. That night, Mark and Emily heard faint chanting that seemed to seep through the walls, lulling them into restless sleep. One evening, Emily focused on the diary, piecing together the story of a young woman named Sophia. Sophia had been part of the church's congregation and lived in the house when it was a rectory. Her writings revealed an ominous tale of secret rituals performed by the clergy, a hidden chapel beneath the house where unspeakable acts were conducted to maintain divine favor over the village. Emily shared her findings with Mark. "The diary mentions a chapel beneath the house. There might be something hidden here." "Like a crypt?" Mark asked, his curiosity piqued. "Exactly, we need to find it." The couple began to explore every inch of the house, tapping on walls and searching for hidden passages. They finally uncovered a trapdoor beneath a threadbare rug in the corner of the living room. As they pried it open, a gust of cold air rushed past them, carrying a smell of mildew and something else, something rotten. The narrow staircase leading into darkness seemed endless. Armed with flashlights, Mark and Emily descended cautiously, their steps echoing off the stone walls. The air grew colder as they reached the bottom, where a small, ancient chapel lay shrouded in shadows. The chapel was a ghastly sight. Flickering candles surrounded a crude stone altar, stained with dark, dried streaks. Religious icons loomed from the walls, their eyes appearing to follow the couple. Emily shuddered as she imagined the rituals that Sophia had described. As they explored further, Emily found another diary, a continuation of Sophia's tale. Her entries became increasingly frantic, detailing the arrival of a priest named Father Antonio who had introduced the sinister practices. Sophia wrote of sacrifices made to ward off evil, claiming they were necessary to protect the village from an ancient curse. Emily turned to Mark, her voice trembling. Sophia was terrified. She believed the rituals were meant to bind a malevolent spirit. Mark's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance around them. "We need to leave." This is more than we bargained for." As they turned to leave, the temperature plummeted. The flickering candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging the chapel into darkness. Mark and Emily's flashlights dimmed and sputtered, the batteries dying unexpectedly. Panic set in as a low, guttural growl resonated from the shadows, a sound that chilled them to their core. Frantically, they fumbled their way back to the staircase, climbing desperately towards the safety of the house above. As they emerged, gasping for breath, the trapdoor slammed shut behind them with a deafening thud. The house, once filled with warmth and possibility, now felt suffocating and oppressive. The couple retreated to their bedroom, barricading the door and clutching each other in the dark. The chanting resumed, louder now, as if a congregation of unseen entities surrounded them. Whispers skittered across the walls, recounting tales of the village's cursed history. "Maybe it's the spirit Sophia wrote about," Emily whispered, tears in her eyes. "Something's here with us." Desperation fueled their search for answers. Emily continued to translate the diaries, uncovering Sophia's final entry, a plea for help, begging for forgiveness for the role she played in the rituals. She had attempted to warn others, but had been silenced by Father Antonio, who promised eternal suffering for betrayal. Determined to end the haunting, Emily proposed a plan. "We need to return to the chapel and destroy the altar. Sophia's spirit needs to be freed from whatever binds it here." Mark nodded, his resolve firm. Together, they armed themselves with tools and descended once more into the chapel. The air was thick with malice, but they pressed on, breaking the stone altar with force and conviction. With each strike, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to waver, the darkness retreating reluctantly. As the altar crumbled, a scream pierced the air, a sound of agony and release. The temperature rose, and the candles reignited, casting a warm, comforting glow. The malevolent presence that had gripped the house dissipated, leaving only a lingering sadness. Exhausted but victorious, Mark and Emily emerged from the chapel, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders. They knew they could never truly escape the house's dark history, but they had restored a semblance of peace to its haunted halls. The next morning, they left San Bartolomeo, leaving behind the house that had once held such promise. As they drove away, Emily glanced back at the village, wondering how many more secrets lay hidden beneath its idyllic surface. Though they had escaped with their lives, the memory of the sacrament of the haunting would forever linger, a reminder of the sinister forces that lurked in the shadows of history, waiting to be unearthed by those who dared to dream.
The Doorway Song. Chapter 1. In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood, nestled between rows of identical houses, the Morrow family resided in their two-story colonial. It was an ordinary place, where the family shared laughter, stories, and the occasional quarrel. But beneath this facade of normalcy, 8-year-old Lily Morrow harboured a secret, a chilling presence she dared not speak of. Every night, when the rest of the house surrendered to the embrace of sleep, Lily's room came alive with a quiet dread. It began as a feeling, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, growing until she felt eyes watching her from the corner. She called it Other Mommy because it wore her mother's face, only twisted with a sickening grin. "Let me in, Lily," it would whisper, a siren's call dripping with honeyed malice. "Let me love you as your real mommy does." Lily would squeeze her eyes shut, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops, as if he could guard her from the nightmares that lurked beyond her vision. Chapter 2. Her parents, Claire and David, noticed the change in Lily. Once vibrant and full of life, she became withdrawn, her eyes hollow and shadowed. When asked, she would shrug, unwilling to speak of the thing in the corner, fearing its wrath. One morning, after a particularly restless night, Claire decided enough was enough. She sat down with Lily at breakfast, determined to break through the wall her daughter had erected. "Sweetie, is something bothering you? You can tell me anything," Claire coaxed, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Lily's ear. Lily hesitated, her gaze flicking to the corner where other mummy sometimes stood, even in daylight. "It's just... I've been having bad dreams," she murmured. Claire exchanged a worried glance with David. "Maybe we should take her to see someone," he suggested, concern etching his features. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't let them take her away. She couldn't leave Mr. Hops behind, her only defense against the creeping terror. Chapter 3. That night, the air was heavy with anticipation, a storm gathering beyond the veil of sleep. As Lily lay in bed, she clutched Mr. Hops tightly, willing herself to stay awake. But exhaustion soon claimed her, and the darkness of slumber enveloped her like a shroud. She awoke to a familiar whisper, a susurration that caressed her ears with falsy tenderness. "Lily, my darling, let me in. Let me show you a world where you'll never be alone." Lily's eyes snapped open, her breath caught in her throat. There, at the foot of her bed, stood other Mommy, her eyes glittering with unnatural light. "Go away," Lily croaked, fear clawing at her insides. "But I'm here to help you, sweetheart. Your real Mommy doesn't understand you like I do. I can be whatever you need." Lily shook her head fiercely, clutching Mr. Hops as if the world depended on it. "You're not real!" The entity's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too predatory. "Oh, I'm very real, Lily, and I'll keep visiting until you let me in." Chapter 4. The days dragged on, each one bleeding into the next, a haze of sleepless nights and anxious days. Claire and David were at their wits' end, unable to help their daughter as the presence continued its relentless assault. Desperate, Claire turned to an old friend, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove, who dabbled in the supernatural. Though skeptical, Claire was willing to try anything to save her daughter. Mrs. Hargrove arrived with an air of mystery, her eyes sharp and discerning. She spoke with Lily, her voice gentle and soothing, coaxing out the truth about other Mommy. "It's important, Lily, to remember that you have the power here," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice a soothing balm to the girl's frayed nerves. "This entity feeds on fear and doubt. You must be brave." Lily nodded, though her heart quaked with uncertainty. How could she be brave when every fibre of her being screamed in terror? Chapter 5. That night, Mrs. Hargrove stayed with Lily, a guardian against the encroaching darkness. The air was thick with tension, an electric charge that prickled the skin. As the clock struck midnight, other Mommy materialised, its form wreathed in shadows that slithered across the walls. It was stronger now, more defined, as if it had drawn sustenance from Lily's fear. "Lily, my love," it crooned, its voice resonant and hypnotic. "You've brought a friend. How delightful." Mrs. Hargrove stood her ground, her presence a bulwark against the malevolent entity. "You have no power here," she declared, her voice steady and unwavering. Other Mommy's eyes flicked to Mrs. Hargrove, its smile faltering for the first time. "I only want to help Lily. She needs me." "Lily has her family," Mrs. Hargrove retorted, a fierce protectiveness burning in her eyes. "You are not welcome here." The entity's form flickered, its edges blurring as if struggling to maintain its shape. "I will return, Lily. You cannot keep me away forever." With a final, baleful glare, other Mommy dissipated into the shadows, leaving the room eerily quiet. Chapter 6. As dawn broke, Lily awoke to find Mrs. Hargrove watching over her, a reassuring presence in the aftermath of the encounter. The oppressive weight that had lingered for so long had lifted, the air sweet and fresh with promise. "You did well, Lily," Mrs. Hargrove praised, her voice warm with pride. "Remember, you are stronger than you think." Lily smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign, yet welcome. She knew the battle wasn't over, that other Mommy would return, but with her family by her side and the strength she had discovered within herself, she was ready. The days passed, the spectre of other Mummy fading into a distant memory. Lily grew brighter, her laughter echoing through the halls once more, a melody that chased away the lingering shadows. And though the night still held its mysteries, its unseen terrors waiting in the wings, Lily knew she was not alone. She had her family, her protectors, and the unwavering knowledge that she held the key to her own heart.
The scream beneath the earth, beneath the modest town of Waverley, lay a network of forgotten tunnels, remnants of the old coal mines that had once been the town's lifeblood. Over the years, the entrance to these tunnels was sealed off, the horrors they contained buried with them. But on one fateful day, a tremor shook the town, and an ancient, monstrous presence stirred beneath the earth, ready to claim what was once its domain. The tremor. The sun was just beginning to rise over Waverley when the ground trembled. Dishes rattled on kitchen shelves, windows shuddered in their frames, and a low, eerie rumble seemed to emanate from the depths below. The townspeople paused, eyes wide with unease, their hearts skipping with a primordial fear they could not name. An old miner, Edgar Frost, was among the first to feel the shift. He had spent his youth in the tunnels, and the quake awoke memories long buried. He recalled the tales whispered among miners about a creature that dwelled in the deep, a beast of earth and shadow. Edgar had never believed those tales, until now. Teku, the awakening. At the town meeting that evening, the atmosphere was tense. The mayor, a robust man named Henry Wallace, addressed the crowd, trying to maintain calm. "It was just a minor quake, folks. Nothing to worry about," he assured them. "We've had small tremors before." Edgar stood, his voice gravelly with age and worry. "This is different. It's the mines. They were sealed for a reason." Laughter rippled through the room, dismissive and derisive, but Edgar persisted. "There was something down there. My father spoke of it, and his father before him. It's not just a tale. We need to reseal those tunnels." The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet unease. Edgar's words resonated with those who remembered their own grandparents' stories of the darkness beneath Waverley. The third, the exploration. Despite Edgar's warnings, a group of adventurous teenagers, led by Jack Miller, decided to explore the tunnels. They sneaked out at night, armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility that only youth could afford. The air was cold and damp as they pried open the rusted metal gate that blocked the entrance to the tunnels. Darkness swallowed them, the narrow beams of their flashlights slicing through the gloom. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of the earth pressing down upon them. "Do you hear that?" whispered Sarah, one of the braver souls of the group. The others paused, straining to listen. There it was, a low pulsating hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. It was as if the earth itself was breathing, alive and aware. Eiffel, the encounter. They stumbled deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, their laughter and bravado fading into uneasy silence. The hum grew louder, more insistent, echoing off the stone walls like a malevolent heartbeat. Then, from the darkness, it emerged. The creature was a mass of shifting shadows and earth, its form constantly changing, as if it were part of the tunnels themselves. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, piercing and ancient. Panic erupted among the group. Jack shouted for everyone to run, but it was too late. The creature moved with terrifying speed, enveloping them in its darkness. Their screams were swallowed by the earth, the tunnels devouring them whole. The town's realization. When the teenagers failed to return home, the town was thrown into chaos. Panic spread like wildfire as parents and friends scoured the town for any sign of them. Edgar's warnings took on a new weight. The old stories were no longer dismissed as mere folklore. The fear was palpable, and the townspeople were forced to confront the possibility that something truly monstrous lurked beneath their feet. In an emergency meeting, Mayor Wallace called for volunteers to search the tunnels. Reluctantly, a group of men, Edgar among them, armed themselves with flashlights, and descended into the darkness. The descent. The air grew colder as they descended, the oppressive weight of the earth above a constant reminder of their isolation. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the pounding of their hearts. The group pressed on, guided by Edgar's knowledge of the tunnels. They found signs of the teenagers, a flashlight, a discarded backpack, evidence of their passing. And then they heard it, a guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very rock. The creature emerged from the shadows, more terrifying than Edgar had described. It was as if the darkness had taken form, a mass of shadow and earth given life. 7. The confrontation. The men faced the creature with a mixture of terror and determination. Edgar, driven by a sense of duty and guilt for not having done more to prevent this, stepped forward. "We have to lead it back," Edgar shouted over the roar of the beast. "It's drawn to fear, to movement. We need to give it something to chase." With a plan in place, they divided into 2 groups. One would lure the creature deeper into the tunnels, while the other would work to reseal the entrance. Edgar's group moved quickly, taunting the creature, drawing it away from the others. The earth trembled beneath them, the creature's growls reverberating through the tunnels. B8. The sacrifice. As the creature lunged, Edgar realized the only way to save the town was to trap it once more. He motioned for the others to escape while he stayed behind, using his flashlight to blind the beast momentarily. With the creature distracted, the remaining men worked frantically to seal the entrance. They heaved stones and debris into the opening, their hands raw and bleeding, driven by desperation and the knowledge that failure meant doom for Waverley. Edgar's final cry echoed through the tunnels, a sound of defiance and sacrifice. And then, silence. 9. The aftermath. The entrance was sealed, the monstrous presence contained once more. The townspeople gathered in mourning, a somber understanding passing between them. Edgar had given his life to protect them from the darkness below. Waverley continued on, but the memory of that night lingered. The townspeople knew that beneath their feet lay an ancient terror, waiting for the day it might awaken again. And so they lived, each step on the earth a reminder of the scream beneath, a cautionary tale of the darkness that once threatened to consume them all.
Silence of the abyss. The planet Nova 6 hung silently in the void, a marble orb cloaked in swirling mists and ethereal greens. Its abandoned cities loomed like forgotten monuments to a civilization long gone. The atmosphere, though breathable, was laced with a palpable sense of foreboding. The air itself felt heavy, like a weighted presence bearing down on anyone who dared to disturb its peace. This was where the crew of the Artemis found themselves, drawn by a distress signal that flickered intermittently from the planet's surface. Captain Mira Holt stood on the bridge of her ship, peering at the holographic display of the planet below. Her crew had been restless since they entered orbit, the eerie silence of the ghostly world gnawing at their nerves. The distress signal, weak and erratic, had been their only guide, leading them to the deserted wasteland. "Scan complete," reported Lieutenant Sam Keane, the ship's communication officer. "No signs of life detected, but the signal is originating from a facility in the northern hemisphere." Mira nodded, her eyes tracing the contours of the planet on the display. "Prepare for landing. We need to investigate. If anyone is down there, they might need our help." So, as the Artemis descended through the planet's atmosphere, the crew prepared for what lay ahead. The landing was smooth, the ship settling on the soft earth with a gentle thud. Outside, the air was still and silent, the only sound the distant hum of the ship's engines. Mira led the way as the crew disembarked, their boots crunching on the gravelly surface. The facility stood before them, a looming structure of metal and glass, its windows dark and opaque. A sense of unease settled over the team as they approached, a feeling as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet, the air thick with the smell of decay. Dust coated every surface, and the lights flickered weakly overhead. The crew spread out, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. "Stay together," Mira ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." As they moved deeper into the facility, they came upon signs of a struggle: overturned furniture, scorch marks on the walls, and, most chilling of all, the bodies. The corpses were scattered throughout the rooms, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. It was clear they had been fleeing from something, but what that something was remained a mystery. "Captain," called Dr. Elise Tran, the ship's medic, her voice tense. "You need to see this." Mira hurried to join her, finding Elise standing over a console in what appeared to be a command center. The screen flickered to life, displaying the last recorded log of the facility's former inhabitants. The video showed a group of scientists, their faces drawn and haggard, speaking in hushed tones. They spoke of voices in the night, of shadows that moved on their own, and of colleagues who vanished without a trace. Their fear was palpable, their words laced with desperation. "It's the planet," one of them said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's alive. It knows we're here, and it doesn't want us to leave." The log ended abruptly, the screen cutting to static. Mira felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were clear. The planet itself was the threat, a sentient force that preyed on the minds of those who dared to intrude. "We need to leave," Mira said, her voice firm. "There's nothing we can do for them now." But as they turned to go, the doors slammed shut with a deafening clang, the lights flickering out to plunge them into darkness. Panic rose in Mira's chest as she felt the oppressive weight of the planet's presence closing in around them. "Stay calm," she shouted, though her own heart was pounding. "We'll find another way out." The crew stumbled through the darkened halls, the walls seeming to close in around them. Whispers echoed in their ears, sinister and taunting, the voices of the dead calling out to them. Mira fought to keep her fear at bay, her mind racing as she tried to find a way to escape the planet's grip. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors one by one, her crew began to succumb to the planet's influence. Lieutenant Keane, normally so composed, began to babble incoherently, his eyes wide with terror as he clawed at the walls. Dr. Tran collapsed to the floor, clutching her head as if in agony, her screams echoing in the darkness. Mira felt the weight of despair pressing down on her, but she forced herself to keep moving, dragging her remaining crew with her. They stumbled upon a control room, the only source of light in the otherwise pitch-black facility. The planet seemed to sense their presence, its whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if urging them to give in to its madness. Desperate, Mira scanned the room, her eyes falling on a console with a blinking light. A backup generator. If she could activate it, they might have a chance. She worked quickly, her hands trembling as she input the commands, praying for salvation. With a hum, the facility's lights flickered back to life, the doors unlocking with a metallic groan, the oppressive presence lifted, the whispers fading to nothingness as the planet's hold weakened. "Move!" Mira shouted, pushing her crew forward. They fled through the corridors, their footsteps pounding on the metal floors as they raced towards the exit. Outside, the air felt lighter, the oppressive silence giving way to the distant rustle of the wind. The Artemis loomed ahead, a beacon of hope against the desolate landscape. Mira urged her crew onward, their spirits lifting as they neared the ship. As they boarded, Mira cast one last glance at the planet, its surface serene and deceptively peaceful. They had survived, but she knew they were lucky to have escaped with their lives. The planet was a predator, a silent hunter lying in wait for its next victim. Back aboard the Artemis, Mira took a deep breath, her heart still racing. The crew settled into their stations, the ship lifting off the ground with a shuddering rumble. They soared into the sky, leaving the haunted world behind. As the stars enveloped them, Mira knew they would carry the memories of Nova 6 with them, a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors lurking in the void. The silence of the abyss was a warning, a testament to the mysteries that awaited those who dared to explore the darkness of space.
The Devil's Seed, When Emily and Mark Hastings moved to the quaint town of Willow Creek, they thought it would be the perfect place to raise their new baby, Sophie. The charming streets lined with maple trees and the friendly neighbors made them feel like they had found a slice of heaven on earth. But as Sophie grew, something dark began to unfurl within their idyllic life. Sophie was a beautiful child, with curls as golden as sunlight and eyes as blue as the summer sky. She was the kind of baby that drew admiring glances from strangers who would often comment on her angelic appearance, but from the start, Emily sensed something unsettling beneath the surface. It began with small things, like how Sophie would stare intently at empty corners of the room, her eyes following something invisible to everyone else. As Sophie grew from a toddler into a child, her strange behavior became harder to ignore. She developed an unsettling fascination with fire, spending hours watching the flickering flames in the fireplace. Emily and Mark found this odd, but dismissed it as a phase. Then came the nightmares. Sophie would wake up screaming, her voice echoing through the house. But when Emily rushed to her side, Sophie would be eerily calm, claiming she didn't remember what had scared her. Emily confided in Mark about her growing unease. "It's just a phase, Em," Mark reassured her. "Kids have active imaginations. She'll grow out of it." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Sophie's playdates became increasingly scarce as other parents began to notice her odd behavior. She would whisper strange things to the other children, things that seemed to fill them with dread. One day, Sophie came home from school with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that chilled Emily to the bone. "Mommy, I made a new friend today," Sophie announced, her voice a sing-song melody. Emily forced a smile. "That's great, sweetie. What's your friend's name?" Sophie's eyes glittered with an unsettling glee. "His name is Ezra. He's very old and knows lots of secrets." That night, Emily and Mark were awakened by the sound of laughter. It was Sophie's laughter, but there was something else. Another voice, a deep, raspy murmur that sent a shiver down their spines. They rushed to Sophie's room but found her alone, sitting up in bed, grinning at the darkness. "Who were you talking to, Sophie?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ezra," Sophie replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He likes to play at night." The couple exchanged worried glances. Mark decided it was time to consult a child psychologist, hoping to find a rational explanation for Sophie's behavior. Dr. Owens, a calm and experienced therapist, assured them that imaginary friends were normal for children Sophie's age. But as Emily described the increasingly sinister nature of Sophie's interactions with Ezra, Dr. Owens's expression grew more serious. "Keep an eye on her," Dr. Owens advised. "If things escalate, we may need to explore this further." The situation did escalate. Sophie's imaginary games grew darker and strange occurrences plagued the Hastings home. Objects would go missing, only to be found in places they couldn't possibly have ended up on their own. The family cat, Whiskers, began to avoid Sophie, hissing and arching its back whenever she approached. Then came the incident that shattered any lingering doubts. One evening, Emily and Mark were having dinner when they heard a loud crash from Sophie's room. Rushing upstairs, they found her standing amidst shattered glass, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The window was broken, but there was no sign of how it had happened. Sophie simply smiled up at them. Ezra said it was time to open the door, she explained, her voice dripping with malice. Emily felt a wave of fear wash over her. She realized that Ezra wasn't just a figment of Sophie's imagination. There was something malevolent influencing their daughter, something that thrived on fear and chaos. Desperate, Emily reached out to Father Bennett, the local priest, hoping for answers. He listened intently as she recounted the events, his face growing pale. "There are dark forces in this world that prey on the innocent," Father Bennett said gravely. "I will come to your home and perform a blessing." The blessing seemed to have a calming effect, but it didn't last. That night, Sophie's screams pierced the air once more. Emily and Mark rushed to her room, only to find her bed empty. Panic surged through them as they searched the house, finally finding Sophie in the basement, standing before an old mirror, her reflection twisted into a grotesque form. "Ezra says you can't stop him," Sophie giggled, her voice echoing with a sinister undertone. Emily felt her heart break as she reached for her daughter, pulling her away from the mirror's malevolent influence. Mark smashed the mirror and the spell seemed to break. Sophie collapsed, unconscious, but the dark presence lingered in the air. With the mirror destroyed, Sophie gradually returned to her old self, her memories of Ezra fading like a bad dream. But the Hastings family was forever changed. They sold the house and moved away, hoping to leave the darkness behind. Yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Ezra was still watching, waiting for another chance to sow chaos. Even now, years later, Emily sometimes catches Sophie staring into mirrors, her eyes reflecting something that makes Emily's skin crawl, a reminder that some evils are never truly vanquished, only biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again.
The Unholy Contract. Ethan Grant, a successful attorney known for his charisma and ruthless ambition, had built a formidable reputation in the heart of New York City. With a track record of high-profile victories and an unerring sense of strategy, Ethan was often referred to as the devil's advocate in the legal circles, a title he wore with pride. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was silky smooth, dripping with an eerie charm. "Mr. Grant," it said, "we have a proposition for you." Intrigued, Ethan agreed to meet at an upscale bar in the Lower East Side. He arrived to find a man in an impeccably tailored suit waiting for him. The man's eyes were piercing, exuding an unsettling intensity that made Ethan momentarily uncomfortable. "My name is Adrian Locke," the man introduced himself with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I represent a client with an unusual legal predicament." As Adrian outlined the case, Ethan realized it was no ordinary legal issue. His client, Victor Langford, a reclusive billionaire, was facing accusations of orchestrating an elaborate scheme that had cost numerous people their livelihoods, and in some instances, their lives. The evidence was damning, yet Adrian assured Ethan that Langford was innocent. "We need someone of your caliber, Mr. Grant," Adrian said, leaning in. "Someone who can navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion and the courtroom with equal skill." Ethan, driven by ambition and the promise of a hefty retainer, accepted the case without hesitation. As Ethan delved into the details, he noticed strange coincidences and inexplicable events surrounding Langford's case. Documents disappeared, witnesses changed their testimonies, and even the prosecution's evidence mysteriously weakened. Despite these oddities, Ethan pressed forward, determined to win. One night, while preparing for the trial in his office, Ethan felt a chilling presence. The room grew cold, and shadows seemed to dance on the walls. He dismissed it as exhaustion, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. The trial began, and Ethan was at the top of his game. His arguments were persuasive, his cross-examinations ruthless. Yet, as he scrutinized the jury, he noticed something unsettling, an unnerving stillness in their eyes as if they were under a spell. In the evenings, Adrian would visit Ethan, offering subtle guidance and encouragement, but there was something sinister in his words, a suggestion that transcended mere legal advice. "You're doing well, Ethan," Adrian would say, his voice carrying an undertone of malevolent pleasure. "Soon, the truth will reveal itself." As the trial progressed, Ethan's dreams turned into nightmares. Dark figures loomed over him, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. He saw flashes of flames and heard distant screams echoing in the recesses of his mind. Each morning he awoke drenched in sweat, the visions haunting his waking hours. Desperate to understand, Ethan sought the counsel of an old friend, Father Michael, a priest who had long ago tried to steer him away from his materialistic pursuits. "Ethan, this case carries a darkness beyond what we see," Father Michael warned, his expression grave. You must be careful. Not everything is as it appears. Despite the priest's warnings, Ethan couldn't back down. His reputation, his pride, everything was tied to this case. The final day of the trial arrived, and Ethan stood before the jury, delivering a closing argument that was nothing short of mesmerizing. His words flowed like a river, captivating everyone in the courtroom. As the jury deliberated, Ethan felt a strange energy in the air, as if the very room was holding its breath. When the verdict was announced, not guilty, the room erupted in chaos. Ethan had won. That evening, Adrian invited Ethan to a celebration at Victor Langford's mansion. The estate was grand, filled with opulence that bordered on excessive. As Ethan entered, he was greeted by Victor himself, a tall, enigmatic figure whose eyes seemed to pierce through him. "Thank you, Mr. Grant," Victor said, his voice a deep rumble. "You have done more than just win a case." As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew more surreal. The guests moved like phantoms, their faces obscured by shadow. Ethan felt an oppressive weight in the air, a presence watching from the corners of the room. He stumbled upon a hidden door partially ajar, and curiosity drew him inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with strange symbols and artifacts that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. At the centre stood an altar, and on it a contract written in an ancient script. Ethan's heart raced as he realised the truth. The contract bore his signature, but it wasn't inked with a pen. It was written in blood. His blood. Panic surged through him as he turned to leave, only to find Adrian and Victor blocking his path. Their faces were no longer human, twisted into demonic visages that filled him with dread. "You see, Ethan," Adrian said, his voice now a guttural growl, "you've been part of something far greater than any trial. This was your initiation, your pact with us." Victor's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound that chilled Ethan to the bone. "Welcome to the fold, Ethan. You've proven yourself worthy." Ethan tried to back away, but the room seemed to close in around him, the walls alive with malevolent intent. The realization crashed over him. He had been manipulated, ensnared in a web of darkness from which there was no escape. As the shadows consumed him, Ethan understood that he had become the very thing he had once prided himself on, a true advocate of the devil. His ambition, his desire for power, had led him to this unholy fate. The world outside continued, oblivious to the horror unfolding within Langford's mansion. But for Ethan Grant, there would be no escape from the hellish contract he had unwittingly signed, his soul forever bound to the dark forces he had served so well.
The Veil of Perdition. The Icarus hung silently in orbit around the planet Xiphus, its metallic shell glinting in the eerie light of the planet's twin suns. Inside, the crew of 6 were gathered in the dimly lit command center, their faces illuminated by the flickering screens displaying data from the surface below. Captain Ilara Dunning stared at the holographic map of Xiphos, her brow furrowed. "We've been circling this rock for days, and there's still no explanation for the energy readings," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. Dr. Malcolm Reyes, the ship's science officer, adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the screen. "The readings suggest a massive subterranean structure, but there's nothing on the surface. It's as if the planet is hollow." Pilot Marcus Lee snorted. "Maybe it's just a malfunction in the sensors. Wouldn't be the first time." Ilara shook her head. "No, it's consistent, and there's something else." She tapped a few buttons, and a new image appeared, a distorted mass writhing beneath the planet's crust. "What is that?" whispered Ava Klein, the communications officer. "I don't know," Ilara admitted, "but we need answers. Malcolm, Marcus, and I will take the Odyssey down to the surface. Ava, keep trying to contact Earth. The rest of you stay on high alert." As the 3 prepared to board the Odyssey, a small shuttlecraft, Ilara felt a growing unease. The air seemed heavier, oppressive, as if the planet itself was watching them. The descent to the surface was turbulent. The Odyssey shook violently as it broke through the planet's atmosphere, buffeted by fierce winds and electromagnetic interference. Marcus struggled to keep the craft steady, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "We're almost there," he shouted over the roar. The storm cleared abruptly as they broke through the cloud cover, revealing a barren landscape below. Jagged mountains rose from a desolate plain, their peaks shrouded in mist. "Landing site ahead," Marcus announced, guiding the shuttle toward a flat expanse near the base of the mountains. The Odyssey touched down with a jarring thud, and the crew disembarked, stepping cautiously onto the alien soil. The air was thin, barely breathable, and a strange, sulphurous scent hung in the air. Ilara adjusted her helmet and activated her suit's atmospheric filters. "Let's make this quick. Malcolm, any sign of that structure?" Malcolm consulted his handheld scanner, frowning at the readings. "It should be right below us, but I'm not picking up anything definite." The three of them began their trek toward the mountains, their boots crunching on the gravelly surface. As they neared the cliffs, Ilara noticed peculiar symbols etched into the rock, patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. "Are those writing?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with awe. Malcolm studied the markings, his eyes widening. "This is incredible. It's some form of alien script. We need to document this." Ilara nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The mountains loomed ominously, casting long shadows across the ground as the suns began to set. They reached a narrow fissure in the rock, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Ilara hesitated, glancing at Malcolm and Marcus. "This might lead us to the structure. Are you both ready?" Marcus grinned, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Let's find out what's down there." They slipped through the gap one by one, emerging into a vast cavern that stretched into darkness. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie glow over the chamber. Malcolm scanned the area, his face lit by the device's screen. "The readings are stronger here. There's definitely something below us." A low rumble echoed through the cavern, vibrating the ground beneath their feet. Ilara instinctively reached for her sidearm, her eyes darting around the shadows. "Stay close," she instructed, leading the way deeper into the cave. The air grew colder as they descended, the passage narrowing until they reached a massive stone door, covered in more of the alien script. Malcolm ran his fingers over the symbols, his expression one of wonder and fear. "This door, it's some kind of seal. Whatever's on the other side, they didn't want it getting out." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. "Do we have a choice?" Marcus stepped forward, placing his hand on the door. "If it's a threat, we need to know. Let's do it." With a concerted effort, they pushed against the stone, which slowly ground open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. In the center stood a monolithic structure, pulsating with a faint, ominous light. "What the hell is that?" Marcus muttered, edging closer. Malcolm's eyes were wide with fascination. "It's a power source, or a prison. Maybe both." As they approached, the air vibrated with an unsettling hum, and a voice echoed in their minds, alien and incomprehensible. Ilara staggered back, clutching her head. "Did you hear that?" Marcus nodded, fear etched across his face. "Yeah, and I didn't like it." Malcolm was staring at the structure, transfixed. "It's alive somehow. It's communicating with us." The voice grew lewder, more insistent, as if pleading or warning. Ilara felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a realization that they had disturbed something ancient and powerful. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "Now." But as they turned to flee, the chamber shook violently, and the ground gave way beneath them. Ilara tumbled into darkness, her screams swallowed by the void. She awoke in the dim glow of her suit's emergency lights, pain radiating through her body. Groaning, she looked around, finding herself alone in a narrow tunnel. "Malcolm! Marcus!" she called out, her voice echoing through the passage. Silence answered her. She forced herself to her feet, every step a struggle as she staggered through the darkness, guided by instinct and desperation. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the heart of the planet. After what felt like hours, she emerged into a small chamber where a figure lay crumpled on the ground. It was Marcus, his helmet cracked, lifeless eyes staring at nothing. "No," Ilara whispered, sinking to her knees beside him. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and she turned to see Malcolm standing at the edge of the chamber, staring at the monolithic structure that now loomed over them. "Malcolm?" she asked, rising unsteadily. He turned to her, his eyes hollow, as if he had seen something beyond comprehension. "It's too late, Ilara. We're part of it now." Before she could respond, the ground shook again, and the chamber filled with an unbearable light. Ilara screamed as the world dissolved around her, consumed by the planet's terrifying secret.
The lurkers beneath the threshold. In the small town of Stillwater, nestled between misty hills and dense forests, life moved at a languid pace, as if time itself had forgotten to keep up. The town's inhabitants were accustomed to the peculiar, to the rustle of unseen things in the night, and the strange dreams that sometimes plagued their sleep. They called it the Stillwater Stirrings, and had learned to live with it, attributing it to old wives' tales and overactive imaginations. But there was one house on the outskirts that even the bravest of Stillwater avoided. The Hawthorne House, a Victorian relic perched on the edge of a murky bog, was said to be the epicenter of the stirrings. Its windows, dark and clouded, seemed to watch the world with an eerie intelligence. The house had been abandoned for years, yet it never seemed to fall into disrepair, as if it were maintained by unseen hands. Eleanor Pierce, a recent arrival to Stillwater and a writer of strange tales, had always been drawn to the enigmatic and the unexplained. When she heard about the Hawthorne House, her curiosity was piqued. She dismissed the townsfolk's warnings as superstitious nonsense and resolved to explore the house, hoping to find inspiration for her next book. On a cool autumn afternoon, Elena set out for the Hawthorne House. The path leading to it was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, the air heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and earth. As she approached, a sense of unease settled over her, a feeling that she was being watched by unseen eyes. She shook it off as nerves and pushed open the creaking gate. The house loomed before her, its facade covered in ivy and shadows that seemed to shift with the breeze. The door, surprisingly, was unlocked, swinging open with a soft groan, as if inviting her inside. Eleanor hesitated on the threshold, her instincts urging her to turn back, but her curiosity propelled her forward. Inside, the air was cool and musty, the dim light filtering through stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the light like phantoms. As Elena moved through the rooms, she felt a growing sense of disorientation, as if the house were subtly shifting around her. She made her way to the library, drawn by the promise of dusty tomes and forgotten secrets. The room was lined with shelves, each filled with books that seemed older than time itself. A large desk stood in the center, covered in a thick layer of dust except for one spot where a book lay open, as if someone had been reading it moments before. Eleanor approached the desk, her eyes drawn to the book's pages, which were filled with strange symbols and incomprehensible script. As she reached out to touch it, a sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing the faint light and plunging her into darkness. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive, pressing down on her like a weight. Then, from the darkness, she heard a low, rhythmic chanting, the words twisting and echoing in her mind. It was a language she couldn't understand, yet it resonated within her, filling her with a growing dread. Panic surged through Elena as she fumbled for her flashlight, her hands shaking as she clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the room as it had been, but something was different. The air felt charged. alive with an unseen energy that thrummed beneath her skin. The chanting grew louder, a cacophony of voices rising and falling in a maddening chorus. Eleanor stumbled backward, her flashlight beam flickering as it swept across the room. Her eyes fell on the walls, and she gasped, her heart skipping a beat. The shadows were moving, writhing and twisting like living things. Dark figures, indistinct and amorphous, seemed to stretch and claw at the edges of her vision. They were there and not there, flickering in and out of existence like mirages. And in the centre of it all, a pair of eyes, vast and unfathomable, watched her with a predatory intensity. Elena's mind screamed at her to run, to flee from this place and never look back, but her body refused to obey, frozen in terror as the chanting reached a fever pitch. She could feel it now, the presence in the room, an ancient and malevolent force that had slumbered for eons and was now awakening. The shadows closed in around her, and Elena felt herself being pulled toward the book on the desk. Her mind was filled with visions, glimpses of a world beyond her comprehension, a realm of chaos and darkness where the laws of reality bent and twisted like smoke. The entities that dwelled there were vast and powerful, unfathomable in their motives and desires. With a supreme effort, Elena tore her gaze away from the book, breaking the spell that held her in place. She turned and fled, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as she stumbled through the darkened halls. The chanting followed her, a haunting melody that echoed in her mind. Bursting through the front door, Eleanor stumbled into the fading light of dusk, gasping for breath. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of her car, her heart pounding in her chest. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadows following her, but the road behind was empty. In the days that followed, Elena tried to put the experience behind her, to convince herself that it had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But the dreams persisted, visions of dark places and the entities that dwelled there, whispering secrets in a language she couldn't understand. Stillwater remained unchanged, its inhabitants blissfully unaware of the lurking danger. But Elena knew better. She had glimpsed the truth, seen the things that moved in the darkness, and she knew that the world was not as it seemed. There were doors to other realms, thresholds that should never be crossed, and entities that waited in the shadows, biding their time. As she penned the last words of her tale, Elena felt a chill creep into the room, a reminder of the forces that lurked beyond the veil of reality. She closed her notebook, a sense of unease settling over her. The story was finished, but the truth of what she had seen lingered, a dark presence at the edge of her consciousness. And in the depths of the Hawthorne house, the shadows stirred, waiting for the next unwary soul to awaken them.
The ravaged world. In the silence of the post-cataclysmic world, the air hung heavy with the scent of decay and earth, a grim reminder of the world that had once thrived. The sun, obscured by a blanket of ashen clouds, cast a perpetual twilight across the barren landscape where remnants of civilization lay scattered like bones. Among the ruins, a group of survivors huddled together, their eyes filled with a shared determination to endure the unendurable. Leading the group was Clara, a woman whose resilience had become a beacon of hope in the darkness. Her once vibrant red hair was now streaked with grey, and her eyes held a fierce, unwavering resolve. Alongside her were Alex, a former engineer with a knack for improvisation, and Emma, a medic who had learned to heal with whatever she could find. They moved quietly through the ruins of what had once been a bustling city, now a graveyard of twisted metal and crumbling concrete. Their goal was clear: to reach the distant mountains where rumors spoke of a safe haven, a place untouched by the horrors that had ravaged their world. But the journey was fraught with danger, for the land was not as empty as it seemed. "Clara," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the crunch of debris beneath their feet. "We need to find shelter before nightfall. Those things are more active after dark." Clara nodded, scanning the desolate streets for any sign of a building that might offer them protection. They had encountered the creatures before, monstrous abominations that defied explanation. Twisted and malformed, they prowled the night, hunting anything that dared to move. "There!" Emma pointed toward a dilapidated structure that might once have been a school. Its windows were shattered and the walls were scarred with deep gouges, but it seemed intact enough to provide a temporary refuge. As they approached, Clara motioned for the group to spread out, searching for any signs of danger. Alex moved toward the entrance, his hand gripping a makeshift weapon fashioned from a length of rebar. Emma followed, her eyes scanning the shadows for any movement. The inside of the building was dim and foreboding, filled with the eerie silence of abandonment. Desks lay overturned, papers scattered across the floor, whispering tales of a world that had vanished overnight. Clara led the way, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls as they made their way toward the library, hoping to find a place they could barricade for the night. As they settled in, Alex began to gather what scraps of wood and debris he could find to fortify the door. Emma unpacked their meager supplies, distributing what little food they had left. They ate in silence, each lost in their thoughts, aware of the weight of their survival. It was during the quiet moments between their conversations that Clara felt the weight of their reality pressing down on her. Every decision she made could mean the difference between life and death, not just for herself, but for those who looked to her for guidance. "Do you think we'll find it?" Emma asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "The safe haven?" Clara met her gaze, seeing the flicker of hope mingled with doubt. "We have to believe it's there. Otherwise, what else do we have?" Emma nodded, though the fear lingered in her eyes. "I just wonder if it's all worth it, if we'll ever find a place where we can actually live, not just survive." As the night wore on, the distant sounds of the creatures' calls echoed through the halls, a chilling reminder of the world beyond their fragile sanctuary. Clara stayed awake, listening, her mind racing with plans and contingencies, always thinking of what lay ahead. It was in the darkest hours before dawn that they heard the first signs of movement outside. A scraping, shuffling sound that sent a jolt of fear through their weary bodies. Clara signaled for silence, motioning for Alex and Emma to ready themselves. The door rattled as something pressed against it, testing their defenses. Clara gripped her weapon tightly, ready to defend their shelter with every ounce of strength she had left. The pressure increased, and a low growl resonated through the air. "Get ready," Clara whispered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. She knew that their lives depended on this moment, on their ability to stand together against the darkness that sought to consume them. The door splintered under the assault, and the creature burst into the room, a grotesque amalgamation of limbs and fangs, eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. Clara lunged forward, striking with all her might, while Alex and Emma fought beside her, their resolve unyielding. The battle was fierce and desperate, but together they managed to drive the creature back, forcing it into the shadows where it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, but they were alive, victorious in this small skirmish against the horrors of their world. As dawn broke, casting a pale light across the devastated city, Clara knew they had to keep moving. Each day was a step closer to the promise of safety, a chance to rebuild and reclaim what had been lost. But as they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the true test lay ahead, not just in the journey itself, but in the choices they would be forced to make. In a world where survival often came at the cost of morality, she knew the greatest challenge was not just to endure, but to remain human in the face of inhumanity. With renewed determination, Clara led her group forward into the uncertain future, driven by the hope that somewhere beyond the desolation lay a place where they could finally find peace.
The labyrinth of senu. Dr. Alden Kessler was a man of science driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a deep-seated belief in the malleability of the human form. His laboratory, hidden away in the industrial ruins of a forgotten city, was filled with humming machinery and flickering screens. His latest project, the Synthesis Initiative, aimed to enhance human capabilities by integrating synthetic biology with human DNA. Kessler was obsessed with pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be human, He envisioned a future where disease was eradicated, where human strength and intelligence were limitless. But in his pursuit of perfection, he overlooked the fragility of human nature, both physical and moral. The experiment was set to begin. A group of volunteers, desperate souls seeking redemption or riches, lay on operating tables surrounded by tangled wires and blinking lights. Kessler's assistants, a collection of ambitious young scientists and technicians, moved with precision, guided by their leader's fervent words. "Today we redefine humanity," Kessler announced, his voice reverberating through the sterile room. The volunteers remained silent, their fates sealed by their own choices. The procedure began with an injection of a luminous serum, a cocktail of engineered viruses and synthetic proteins. As the liquid coursed through their veins, the volunteers writhed, their bodies contorting under the strain of transformation. Kessler watched with a mixture of awe and satisfaction as his creations began to change. Muscles rippled and bones creaked, reshaping themselves into forms beyond human comprehension. Skin stretched and split, revealing sinew and muscle beneath. For a moment it seemed that Kessler had succeeded. The volunteers, now grotesque hybrids of flesh and technology, rose from their tables, their eyes glowing with a strange luminescence. But the triumph was short-lived. A guttural scream pierced the air as one of the subjects convulsed, its body collapsing into a mass of thrashing limbs and seething flesh. Panic spread through the lab as more volunteers succumbed to the violent effects of the serum. Kessler's assistants scrambled to contain the situation, but the abominations, driven by a primal rage, tore through their ranks with horrifying efficiency. The laboratory descended into chaos, the air filled with the sound of tearing metal and anguished cries. Amidst the carnage, Kessler stood transfixed, his mind grappling with the enormity of his failure. His dreams of a new humanity had given birth to monstrosities that defied nature's laws. Yet even as the horrors unfolded around him, a part of him marveled at the raw power he had unleashed. The creatures, now free from their confines, began to spread through the facility, leaving destruction in their wake. Their forms were nightmarish, an amalgamation of sinew and circuitry, their movements a grotesque dance of mechanical precision and animalistic ferocity. Driven by a perverse curiosity, Kessler followed the trail of destruction deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of his creation. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He found himself in the heart of the facility, a cavernous chamber dominated by a massive structure, the Nexus. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, tendrils of light reaching out to touch the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. The abominations converged on the Nexus, drawn to its power like moths to a flame. They surrounded it, their bodies intertwining in a macabre symphony of flesh and metal. Kessler realized, with dawning horror, that they were not mindless beasts but part of a greater whole, connected by the Nexus's insidious will. The creature's eyes fixed on Kessler, a myriad of glowing orbs filled with an intelligence that chilled him to the bone. In that moment, he understood that he had not merely transformed flesh, but awakened something far more sinister, a consciousness that transcended human understanding. As the creatures advanced, Kessler backed away, his mind racing for a solution. He had to stop them, to undo the abomination he had wrought. Yet every step he took seemed to lead him further into their embrace, the walls closing in as if the very facility conspired against him. Desperation fueled his resolve as he sprinted toward the control room, a plan forming in his mind. He would overload the system, destroy the Nexus and its creations in a final act of penance. He would erase his mistake, even if it meant his own destruction. Reaching the control room, Kessler frantically manipulated the controls, initiating a cascade of failures throughout the facility. Alarms blared, lights dimmed, and the ground trembled as the machinery reached critical mass. But the Nexus fought back, its tendrils of energy lashing out, trying to maintain its hold on the twisted life it had spawned. Kessler struggled against it, his mind and body strained to the breaking point as he battled the entity for control. In a final desperate act, Kessler hurled himself at the central console, his hands slamming down on the override switch. The facility shuddered as the nexus began to collapse, its energy imploding in a blinding flash. The abominations screamed as they were torn apart by the backlash, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The walls of the facility crumbled and Kessler felt himself falling, enveloped in darkness as the world around him disintegrated. When he awoke, he lay amidst the ruins of his ambition, the facility reduced to a smoking crater. The air was filled with the acrid stench of burnt metal and charred flesh, the remnants of his hubris laid bare. Kessler staggered to his feet, the weight of his failure pressing down on him like a physical force. The nexus was gone, its malign influence extinguished, but the cost was unimaginable. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency crews approached, drawn by the devastation. Kessler knew they would find him here, the architect of a nightmare that defied comprehension. He gazed at the ruins, the twisted remnants of his dreams and aspirations. He had sought to transcend the limitations of humanity, and instead unleashed a terror that had nearly consumed him. As the first responders arrived, Kessler turned away from the wreckage, his mind already racing with ideas for redemption, for a way to atone for the horrors he had unleashed. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. In the labyrinth of senu, he had glimpsed the true nature of humanity, and it terrified him.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.